Welcome to the FlipTech East Coast Podcast, a podcast designed to introduce you to this year's presenters at FlipTech East Coast. This year's conference is being hosted by Collingswood High School on June 29th and 30th and is being presented by the Flip Learning Network. In this very special episode, we introduce you to Aaron Sams. Aaron is this year's keynote on day one of the conference. That's June 29th. He is the author of Flip Your Class, Reach Every Student in Every Class Every Day, and other books on flipped learning. Aaron is one of the pioneers of flipped learning. If you are interested in hearing Aaron or any of our other teacher presenters, please visit fliptech.fliplearning.org to register. Again, that's fliptech.fliplearning.org to register. And we pick it up now with Aaron. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the FlipTech East Coast Podcast. And today we have a very special guest. We have our keynote, one of our keynote speakers, Aaron Sams. And Aaron joins us from his office in Pittsburgh. Hey Aaron, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for inviting me to the conference.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming out. I think that I think we hit a home run having you come out and do a little bit of talking. And
I don't know. I think I'm more like a sacrifice bunt. I don't know.
Well, you know, it's the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. So I would guess that people know you kind of as the originator or founder, you and John Bergman, who founded kind of the flip learning movement out in Colorado, where you both were teaching. And I don't want to take away any of that story from you, but my guess is a lot of our audience knows that story. But for those people who don't know the story, it'd be neat to hear it from your, from your own mouth, and then, and then I'll add some more to it, or I'll ask some more to go with it.
Sure. No, I'll give a little bit of a genesis story, but one thing I never want to do is I never want to take credit for something I didn't do. Just for historical reference, there was a communications professor at Cedarville University in Ohio back in the mid-90s, about 1995. His name was Wesley Baker. And he started posting PowerPoint slides to the college internal network and for students to review before they came to class, and then they came to class and did good stuff rather than sitting and listening to lectures. And he actually called this the classroom flip. And so if you dig around, that is like the first reference to that term somewhere. So it's Professor Wesley Baker, 1995, Cedarville College. A little bit later, something that's often referenced as well is an article in 2000 by some economics professor, incidentally also from Ohio, at this time at Miami University, who started putting up PowerPoints and other things in their classrooms, and essentially doing the same thing that the Flip Classroom does, just without the video component. And actually, I think the economics professors did start to use like VHS stuff that students could check out and view ahead of time. So that the concept has been around. I mean, really, it's just a technological spike that really made it take off, and because pedagogically it's things we've been doing all the time. Read before you get to the class. But what happened from my perspective is in about 2006, 2007, John and I started to experiment with simply recording live lectures and putting those online for students to review if they missed class. We lived up in the mountains. There was a lot of students who missed a lot of class because they were out at school events, and the nearest high school was an hour away. So they were, fourth period or last period of the day was a ghost town on any given day because everyone was out doing cool school stuff. And then once we realized that the video is a really powerful medium, when we're able to reach not only our students, but students out in the rest of the world, and this is pre-YouTube, mind you, we committed to pre-recording all of our lessons in the 2007-2008 school year, and the rest, as they say, is history. It kind of took off from there. Somewhere along the line, the term flipped got attached to us. There's a little story behind that, and maybe you want to explore that, maybe you don't. But we didn't come up with it. It kind of got attached to us, but we kind of picked it up and ran with it. But there was some historical precedent for the concept and for the term prior to us. So I always want to be cautious before I claim anything as my own.
Well, I've given a couple of local things around, and I always say that Flip Classroom isn't necessarily a new concept. It's just made a lot more accessible with the growth of technology.
Yeah.
Go home, read a chapter in your book, come back to school, and we'll talk about it. That's kind of what flipped classroom is. Not to really simplistic.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine you're back in Colorado though, and you and John are working together doing this stuff. There's got to be some sort of funny or introspective or some sort of anecdote that happened that you said, I got to keep this, just in case I'm giving a keynote presentation 10 years from now, I got to keep this anecdote around about what's going on right now. Do you have anything? Do you have anything like that? Like student or, do you have teachers that came up to you that were like, what are you guys nuts? Or,
the prophet is scorned in his hometown.
Right.
It was challenging to get our colleagues on board. It really was, and we were careful. We didn't want to jam anything down anybody's throat. But I think what made it harder is we started experimenting with video the first year that he and I both arrived. We both were new to the school in 2006. And we had replaced two teachers who had been there forever. I mean, they had taught there for like 30 years or something like that. And so here these two new guys come in, and we start rocking the boat. We start, giving conferences and presentations, and there was a lot of attention that was drawn to us. And some people thought that was cool because it kind of put this tiny little school on the map, and some people were actually rather, I think, bitter that these two new guys were getting a lot of attention and stuff. So there was a little bit of some animosity. That said, there were some other teachers who thought it was great and who wanted to learn and jumped on board as well and slowly adopted it. So it was kind of fun, but there's always some weird looks. Oh, there's those guys doing their video thing again. And so, yeah.
If you went back to that school in Colorado, what would it look like? Would it be a flip school, or would it be, I saved that in quotes, or would it be just kind of a run-of-the-mill average?
I think it would probably be a pretty standard high school, because John and I both left within a year of each other to pursue some other things, and the new teachers, I think, might have done it for a year, and then that kind of faded. Most of the other teachers who also were playing with the concept have since gone to other institutions as well. So there might be a handful of people there that are maybe two who were kind of part of that first crop, and I have no idea if they're still using the concept in their classroom or not. So I have no clue.
Right. That's funny. That's funny, not funny, haha, but funny. That's funny. Who would have thought that that you two coming into a school together, like you said, new, and then all of a sudden you're here doing whatever you're doing 10 years later, and John's doing what John's doing 10 years later. It's wild.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, we both jumped in. We'd both been teaching, had years of teaching experience prior to going there. Had both moved there just because we wanted to.
Where were you before you were in Colorado?
I was in Los Angeles, and John was up in Denver. And we had both kind of found this job. We didn't know each other, and had both just wanted to move our families to a small mountain town, and ended up there. But even before we had met, we'd been emailing back and forth, sharing resources, and realized that we had real similar views on education, similar likes for technology and education. So we started working and planning together, and we really did everything together, and we worked really well together. We had some complementary strengths. Mm-hmm. So John's very driven and kind of a go-getter. I'm a little more laid back. So he kind of helped me stay motivated and keep moving that way. When we did our writing, we always joked that he would throw up on the page and I would go in and clean it all up. So he would just kind of get the ideas out there into the wild and in black and white, and I would go in and kind of fine-tune stuff and piece it together. And so it worked well that way. And yeah, we became good colleagues, we became good friends, and just enjoyed working together and hatching new ideas and testing stuff out.
It's like the yin and the yang of exactly. Chemistry teaching, right?
What was really funny though is like in real life, John's a lot more straight laced, and I'm kind of a goofball. But on our chemistry videos, we actually took on opposite personas. Like he was like this like hyperactive crazy dude, and I was just kind of ho hum. And I think part of that is we recorded a lot of these at like 6:30 in the morning, and I am not a morning person by any means. And he gets up at like 4:30 to go run marathons and stuff. So that may have been the switch persona, but it was always kind of odd that we were almost opposites of our real personalities on our videos.
Yeah, that's funny. This is the first time I've ever talked to you about this, but I know that I've read, your intro in your books, the first one, the flip
your classroom.
Yeah, flip your class. I was trying to come up with the full title, but it's.
I got a whole box of them over here.
Yeah.
I can check them.
Right. But I remember reading that you and John are pretty opposite in terms of personality, but are seem to be like-minded pedagogically, and that's probably makes for a really good pairing between the two of you.
Yeah.
But maybe talking more about you, so you moved away from the classroom, from the high school chemistry classroom, and so what kind of motivated you to move on to kind of get out and do whatever you did after that?
Yeah, so 2012, my family and I moved to Pittsburgh, of all places. So people often ask me, like, why did you move from Colorado to Pittsburgh? And I said, oh, I don't know. There was too much sun in Colorado. I really wanted 300 days of gloom and gray, so I moved to the place that has the worst weather in the country. But no, actually, Pittsburgh's a really great city. We really, really like being out here. But no, I came out here to start a distance learning program for a small graduate school, and that's what brought me to Pittsburgh. But that was about the time that a lot of the travel, the work, the requests for consultation, requests for speaking at conferences really, really picked up, and I had to make a decision. I had to either pursue that or stay in the classroom, because I couldn't do more of that because I was already burning all my holidays. I was traveling all my personal days, and I probably sick a few times that I had to just run somewhere and go do an event. And I had to choose, because it wasn't fair to my students, and I felt really kind of guilty about being gone so much. So after just chatting with my wife about what we were going to do, how we were going to proceed, we decided that it was a good time for me to make that exit from the classroom. That was probably the hardest decision I've ever made in my life.
A true teacher always has a hard time moving on from the classroom.
My goodness, because I love teaching. It's part of who I am. So anyhow, we moved to Pittsburgh. I was managing this distance learning program, actually just building it from scratch, and then also traveling a lot. And within about a year, and this is also the summer that the first book came out, and things just got real busy real fast. So I was working and traveling, and I was just burning the candle at both ends. I was on the road 100 to 120 days a year for about 3 years while I was trying to work full time, with the caveat, with the understanding that I would be gone occasionally and out and traveling a lot. And I was just getting tired. I was getting burned out, and it was catching up with me. So my health was suffering. I was not seeing my kids. I was dealing with like anxiety and depression and all sorts of stuff that I just did not. I couldn't keep doing it. Finally, I got to the point where something had to give, and at this time, John wanted to kind of go all in with this, and I wanted to step back. So it was a good time for us to dissolve that business relationship, so he could pursue the things he needed to, and for me to just get my life back in order. And so that's what we did. It was a couple of years ago now, and at that time, I had a few consulting gigs and conferences to speak at. It gave me about 6 months to kind of reboot. I enrolled in a PhD program, and I also started working full time at St. Vincent College, where I had been an adjunct instructor for quite a while. I had the opportunity to move on here full time. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm actually back in the classroom teaching pre-service teachers and picking away at my PhD in STEM education. So moving back to my roots as a science teacher and away from some of the ed tech shenanigans I've been up to.
Do I get to call you Dr. Sams then? Is that
not yet? I've still got I've still got about another year and a summer of coursework, and then I'll be ABD, and then I get to start picking away at dissertation. So at some point you can call me that, but right now you can just call me whatever you want. I respond to most things.
We won't.
Hey,
you. Yeah, I was gonna say you're a dad, right? You have older kids.
Exactly.
Not like how old are your kids? You have a couple of kids, right?
I have 3. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sure you respond to just about anything.
Yep.
so that kind of talks about your journey into the class, or from the classroom to speaking, and then back to the classroom. It sounds like you have the teacher heart. That's kind of what I say about people who are destined to be teaching.
Yeah.
But why did you decide to come to Flip Tech East Coast? What about that?
Yeah, it's been on my radar a while. I know it's something that you got up and running a few years ago, so I knew it was out there, and I'm being far more selective about events that I pursue now. I say no to a lot of requests, but this was it was an opportunity for me to see old colleagues and friends, and also just to meet some new people who were kind of picking up the reins of the conversation around flip learning, because like I said, I'm pursuing work in STEM education now, and less in ed tech, and so I've been somewhat removed from the conversation for the last couple of years, and it'll be good to kind of see where that conversation's at. And really looking forward to that, and then hopefully bringing a little bit of an insider / outsider perspective to where the conversation is now too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because with John taking the FlipCon title and taking that, I feel like the flip community in the United States have been really wanting to have a flip learning network event, so that's to fill that void. So we're really happy to host something like that, and we're glad to fill the void.
Yeah, and part of it too is I stepped off the board of the Flip Learning Network a couple of years ago, so I haven't been involved with that. And it's a great group of people and a great organization. I was more than happy to have helped get that off the ground, and just being able to loop back with that and kind of give back a little bit in that respect as well. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think I actually have almost at least the current board member. I think almost every current board member now is playing some sort of role on for the conference. So nice. I'm excited about that. Even cool. We have I don't know if you know April, but
I do know April very well. I was chatting with her the other day.
Yeah, she's in Korea, and we're trying to figure out a way to get her in. So
cool.
Yeah,
she's been a good friend for many years.
Okay. You know everybody. I just have to remember. There's nobody you don't know. So one of the things that I have been curious about, because and I didn't necessarily want to press you or push you, but now is now we're in the middle of an interview, so I have to ask the hard-hitting questions.
Further up and further in.
Right. So, what is your keynote going to be? I mean, I can imagine what I think it's going to be, but I think I want to know. I want to hear about what you're going to talk about.
It's not the night before yet, so I don't know what it's going to be.
Classic. No, Aaron Sands.
I'm kind of curious. What do you think it's going to be? Let's hear what you think it's going to be first.
Well, in the interest of full disclosure, I saw you speak at ESET2 NJPA.
That's true.
And
yes.
So hearing your get rid of the buzzwords and get down to teaching is what I thought that maybe was a direction or a piece of what you were going to talk about.
Yeah, that will definitely be part of it. The thing you saw at ESET was for definitely a broader audience, educational audience. I want to talk a lot about technology, some of the good and bad that I see happening with technology and the education technology specifically. Something that I do often talk about is what technology can and cannot do, and the role of the teacher in the context of teaching with technology, and what the role, what videos can and cannot do. But I also want to I want to talk a little bit about definitions. And I was, as part of my coursework as a PhD student, I wrote a paper a while back on kind of the historical definitions of flipped classroom, flipped learning, what it has looked like starting with the individuals from Ohio that I mentioned over the course of now 20 plus years, what is common with all of the definitions, what is different about all the definitions, and if you could reduce it to the lowest common denominator, what does it actually look like, and is there a definition out there that actually encompasses that? And I have some thoughts on that, and I'm not going to share them right now because I don't want to spoil it for anybody who wants to come to that session, but you'll have to have me on again afterwards so I can divulge that. But so I want to talk a little bit about that as well, but then I'm going to loop that into just other definitions in education in kind of direction I see a lot of the buzzwords heading, trying to, I think, take over more of the education space than they necessarily should. I think there's a place for niches and a place for terms and a place for some buzzwords. But kind of knowing where those things end and where other things begin is a conversation that's partly missing, and there's a lot of overlap and a lot of overlapping conversations, which are good conversations, but don't necessarily fall in any particular camp.
So you talk about definitions. Do you think that there is an issue with some definitions, or do you think that as educators we kind of need to break down what things are before we actually dive head first, or like what's the scoop with your definitions here?
So with definitions, not just with definitions about what flipping is or what anything is, but what is, what project-based learning is and what all these other aspects of teaching and learning are. A lot of the definitions that I see I think they're just too broad, and they start to encompass more than the element that we're talking about themselves, and they start saying, well, it's this and it's all of this other stuff that we would define as being a good teacher. And I understand that as being a good a goal or an end to which you aspire, and the means through which you're going to get there is this type of learning, this type of pedagogical technique, whatever it happens to be. That's great. There's a place for all of those in the bigger picture, but we have to be really careful that we don't say this technique, project-based learning, is all of this, or flip learning is all of this. We need to figure out where the right spot is, because otherwise we're talking about school. Like, okay, well, we could define what good teaching and learning looks like and what an ideal school looks like. That's a good conversation, but let's not do that under the umbrella of a particular aspect of that bigger picture.
Yeah. Actually, in a smaller setting, I actually have a problem with some people that I know, because they're, I for some reason, the sin of all flip learning advocates is that they do it in isolation. Like, I'm the only guy that does it in my school, right? And so, but the people that I talk to, they say, "Well, flip learning, that's where you make the videos," and then, "Oh, I already do that." And then what happens is that people are exposed to what this teacher thinks is flip learning, when instead what he's doing. Let me be nice about this. What he's doing is just supplementing his teaching with YouTube, and isn't really doing the flipped, doing flip learning. So
and that's why I think I'll frame this as part of my keynote too. Is framing the conversation within what we know sound pedagogical techniques and sound cycles of learning look like, that if we phrase it in that, we can get rid of most of the terminology and just talk about how instruction is being delivered, how we design learning opportunities, how we design our courses and units and whatever. And like, I think that's a more helpful conversation. And you could throw video in there, you can throw lectures in there, you can throw reading in there, whatever happens to be. But it doesn't have to be always the same thing. But let's talk more on the pedagogical side of thing rather than the term or the tech side of things. I
always say good teaching is good teaching, no matter what you do or how you do it. You can't. Yeah. that's the core of what we're trying to do here.
Right. Exactly.
So, speaking aside, part of being at this conference is that you get to be at the conference. Not only do you get to give a keynote, but knowing you and knowing your personality, my guess is you're going to be kind of involved in talking and seeing what people have to offer and stuff. What's the excitement for coming to the conference, or coming to Flip Tech East Coast, or any conference, I guess?
I always learn more than I share at conferences. I get so much out of just sitting and listening to other people's sessions, and not even necessarily the content of the session, but hearing teachers' perspectives on how they use different tools and techniques in their classroom, because it gives me a glimpse as to what their classroom might look like, and that's really exciting to me. And just meeting new people and seeing old friends is always great. Anyone who's ever been to a conference with me knows that just the afterglow times of eating a meal or sharing a drink with people is that's what I absolutely love, and just hanging out and just letting your guard down a little bit and just chatting with colleagues and networking and
Right.
learning about people and their stories.
It's funny because I've done a lot of these interviews. I think I'm up to 20 or 21 now for out of the 25 that I have to do, and every person that I've said, what's going to be the fun part about attending, or what are you going to get out of attending, is I would say that almost everyone, if not everyone, has said that it's just talking to people, kind of seeing people face to face and getting whatever they're going to get from that face to face interaction, which I think is okay, which I think is awesome, because people from the outside looking in are like, oh, flip learning, everything is going to be about technology and not talking and not interacting, but just the opposite. It's about the interaction. And,
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, one of these days, I think I want to host a conference, and I just want to not have the conference. I just want to have a big giant party all day long, because that's where you meet people, and make connections, and learn about them. And if that's what everybody wants to go to a conference for, it's like, why do we do the conference part? Let's just do that out and hang out and have a good time.
Right. Yeah. Well, they have those coffee EDUs that people do.
Oh yeah.
You could do one of those. You could call it I don't know, the beer EDU or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how that's going to work with the general public, but that's okay. We'll figure that out. Okay.
Where it goes, the beer flows.
Right. Well, I did say in my list of questions that I wanted to ask you a surprise question.
Yeah.
And so it's not real deep and meaningful. Well, I guess it could be deep and meaningful, but I'm sure that you've done a lot of growing in the past 10 or 15 years, right? So,
I have. I'm up to 7 feet 8 inches.
Right.
More like
it's better. It's better. It's better than saying you're 250.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the way I'm growing. But you've grown a lot pedagogically and in your own philosophies and things like that, and you've met a lot of people that you've probably integrated things into what you do with what they do. A lot of overlap there. Mm-hmm. But if you could go back to the younger version of Aaron Sams, maybe 15 years ago, before the flip stuff, even before Colorado, maybe you're Los Angeles, who knows? If you could give yourself one piece of advice to follow, what would more experienced Aaron Sams tell the younger version of Aaron Sams?
Oh, yeah, I know this one.
Oh, you're not supposed to know it. It's supposed to be.
No. Because I encourage people to do this in some of my sessions, and I encourage my pre-service teachers as well. When my first probably 4 or 5 years of teaching, I pretty much forgot everything that I learned in my teacher preparation courses, and everything that I've learned since leaving the classroom has pointed me back to that stuff. And the most important things that I completely blew off because I was just in survival mode were actual educational psychology stuff, because at the time I didn't see the relevance. I didn't see the point. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. But now, almost 20 years into the education field, if you don't understand what you actually believe about educational psychology and how people actually learn and construct knowledge, if you don't know what you believe about that and what's been written about that, then you're going to be just floundering. You're just going to be grabbing this resource and that resource, and it might work with what you believe and it might not. But if you have a solid understanding of that, and you have a solid belief structure about epistemology, like what knowledge is and how we actually put it together neurobiologically in our brains, you can then design your lessons accordingly. And you're going to do so with more fidelity than if you're just grabbing resources here and there. So absolutely, get your head around that early in your career, and you don't have to wait 15 years in to go, oh man, I really should just dust off that old textbook and go, wait, who's this Vygotsky guy again? Who's that PJ guy again? Like, figure that kind of stuff out early on. And also, along those lines, I think all teachers need to like really take more philosophy and specifically around the realm of epistemology. Like, what is knowledge? What is this thing that we're trying to bring students to an understanding of? Because if you don't get that on a philosophical level, again, you're just going to be doing stuff arbitrarily.
Right. Wow. That's and yet another deep and meaningful conversation with Aaron Sams.
Drop some knowledge.
Wow. Dropping words that I don't even know. Epistemology. It sounds like
you're Googling right now.
Right. I'm like, okay, epistemology. No, but I mean, in all seriousness, I think that's core for it's hard for one teacher to do this, but then when you get a group of teachers or a whole school together and they're not on the same page, talk about some
absolutely
disasters waiting to happen. You know, like
you're absolutely right. I mean, you said it right there that they're not on the same page. If you're not on the same page, you're not even.
And it doesn't even matter if you're. Yeah, it doesn't even matter if you're just a little bit off. But if you're not together philosophically about what you're trying to accomplish,
exactly.
It's up to some people to bring you together about what you, about what you need to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Aaron, this has been an amazing dream of mine to sit here and talk to you one-on-one. And I am so glad you decided to join us for this little interview.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Yeah. So Aaron is going to be the keynote speaker at Flip Tech East Coast, June 29th and 30th. And I have yet to get an actual title of his keynote presentation, but I'm sure it's going to be awesome. And you know what it's going to be about because we just talked about it here. So, so Aaron, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
That's it for this episode of the Flip Tech East Coast podcast. We hope that you join us at the conference. Again, for more information or to register, please visit fliptech.fliplearning.org. Again, that website is fliptech.fliplearning.org, and we can't wait to see you there.